Ireland has changed radically in the last decade. It had been changing for maybe the previous decades, but at a much slower pace. And now, since about 2011, we've gone into this kind of, I don't know, sprint towards insanity, towards the cliff edge. And nothing that happens in public now seems to have anything to do with the culture that we left behind us, or the culture that I was part of growing up. And it seems to have, we seem to have been taken over by forces who kind of had no visibility really in the culture up to like 10 or 15 years ago, and now have the run of the country. And so the things that are happening, who knows where they're coming from? We have a general idea that they are entirely, almost entirely being imposed from outside, ideological programs and agendas that are being imposed on us from outside through all kinds of surreptitious means.
Welcome to another episode of Counterculture, the show that stands at the intersection of reason and faith in the battle against sentimentality. Like the rest of the West, Ireland is a country awash in contradiction. In 1995, after decades of Jimmy Carter-esque malaise, Ireland slashed its corporate tax rate from 40% to 12.5%, and subsequently became a magnet for foreign investment, seeing robust economic growth as a result. Last year, in fact, Ireland's economy grew faster than any other European nation. At the same time, however, like many wealthy enclaves in the United States, as Ireland grew rich, it enabled a nihilistic, mal-educated, haughty political class that made mascots out of the so-called marginalized to assuage their guilt pangs by aggrandizing their control over the lives of others. The resultant societal instability this produced was on display recently in the rioting and looting that took place in Dublin after a mass stabbing attack targeting school children, allegedly committed by an Algerian immigrant on the public dole. The response from the culpable political class was predictable, invoking the left's favorite Loch Ness monster, right-wing extremism, which is to say conservatives, which is to say white non-Marxist. This, combined with unsettling videos of lily-white Irish politicians offering competing confessionals for their whiteness and calling for totalitarian restrictions on free expression for peaceful pluralists like me, we're left wondering what exactly is Ireland's future and, by extension, Western Europe's. To give us perspective on that question, among others, we're pleased to be joined by Irish thinker, talker, author, and columnist John Waters, who's been documenting and decrying Ireland's cultural descent. John, welcome to Counterculture. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
John, I feel like talking about Ireland a little bit like I do talking about America in so many respects, which is it's sort of like analyzing Finnegan's Wake. I'm having a hard time distinguishing when I'm confronting reality and when I'm confronting some sort of dystopian dream.
Yeah, that's about right. Ireland has changed radically in the last decade. It had been changing for maybe the previous decades, but at a much slower pace. And now, since about 2011, we've gone into this kind of, I don't know, sprint towards insanity, towards the cliff edge. And nothing that happens in public now seems to have anything to do with the culture that we left behind us, the culture that I was part of growing up. And it seems to have, we seem to have been taken over by forces who kind of had no visibility really in the culture up to like 10 or 15 years ago, and now have the run of the country. And so the things that are happening, who knows where they're coming from? We have a general idea that they are entirely, almost entirely being imposed from outside, ideological programs and agendas that are being imposed on us from outside through all kinds of surreptitious means, and also through captured political system, political parties and so on, who are essentially all bought and paid for, and entirely purchased media also, who just are no longer in the business of telling the truth or the facts. They are simply in the business of falsifying reality. So, the litany of things you described there, including the events that happened on the 23rd of October in Dublin, I got to say to you, I don't even know to what extent that account of things is accurate or true. We don't know, because of the manner it's being reported does not in any way resonate with my experience as a journalist of how these events would have been covered in the past. So I have question marks, and there have been question marks raised as to whether anything that we learned or were told about what happened that day or that night has any basis in reality.
Well, just on that score, the person who was allegedly responsible for that mass knife attack. I mean, I remember we talked a few weeks ago about that. And I know there's been questions from some in the press to Irish ministers about, what this guy came into the country a couple of decades ago. We don't have any record of him ever working. His name I haven't seen mentioned. Confirmation of his background, how he got to the country, what he's done since he's been in country. All of that stuff from the accounts I've read just in Western media has been really opaque as well. And so I'm wondering if you have any more information on the ground there.
No, I don't, and this is extraordinary. I mean, we don't actually know. 3 weeks on from the event, we are told that 3 children were stabbed, one very seriously. We still don't know the names of these children. We don't know where they're from. We don't know who their parents are. This is unprecedented. People say to me, and this is the interesting thing, like that. People say, when you say that here now, people say things like, "Oh, well, that's because they're children." Well, actually, that sounds plausible, but it's actually not true, because that isn't the way that events, attacks, disappearances, kidnappings, murders of children, God forbid, would have been dealt with in the media in the past. It's just that people's minds are playing tricks on them, because that's what the game is, to make people's minds play tricks on them, so they don't actually know whether they're going or coming, or whether what they're seeing is what they're seeing. And so what happens is people just sort of give up trying to comprehend reality. So I cannot sit here and tell you that anything happened that day. I cannot tell you definitively that any of the things we were told had happened have actually happened, because we've seen no evidence of it. We've heard no account of the condition of these children that is in any way elaborative concerning their injuries or their condition or their state of, except there was a reference at some point that one of the girls was in a coma. We still don't know. I mean, that's 3 weeks ago. This is bizarre. One
of the other aspects of the story was that there was an adult walking with the children, and she was attacked as well. And then I thought a significant other of hers had said something about what had happened. There was some sort of eyewitness account because a rideshare driver had intervened or something like that. Do we not know that to be true either, or?
Well, again, there's a fragmentation of information there, because I mean, what we were told is that in the first instance, that a Brazilian man on a bicycle delivering food, takeaway food, was passing by, and he saw, and he actually intercepted the assailant, hit him on the head with his crash helmet, and overcame him in that way. And then very shortly after, he was a Brazilian man, and that guy has now become a national hero on the media, on the internet, in the past 3 weeks. And in fact, something close, approximating €500,000 has been collected for him from donations on GoFundMe, right? But then it emerges that actually the guy who was there first was an Irishman who disarmed the assailant, took the knife off him, threw it across the road for some reason, which is mysterious also. And he has got about €8,000 in GoFundMe donations. So, all of this kind of really what you can only say is elaborate gaslighting is going on. And as regards to the woman, yes, she was supposed to be seriously injured, but then there was a video of her released which shows her on a stretcher on her phone. So now you're beginning perhaps to see that there's something very strange here indeed. The whole thing is extraordinarily bizarre. And when you actually then move forward to the events subsequent to this the stabbing incident, and you see that night there was rioting in Dublin, as you said, that there was, looting, breaking of shop windows. Well, let me tell you a little bit about that. There is one video which I've seen which shows police officers in riot gear breaking plate glass windows. There are reports, I saw myself video of men in masks, which was highly resonant for me because I've seen these guys before. This is the uniform of Antifa, who infiltrate all protests which are unhelpful or inconvenient to the government and cause trouble within them, so that the protesters, whatever their cause, will get a bad name and be put down as domestic terrorists or extremists. This is a standard trope which has emanated out of the United States in the last decade or so, via the Democratic Party, I would have to say, and their followers, and all of that kind of wokery, and the BLM stuff and the LGBT stuff. We've seen this for the first time in our country. We've seen this kind of stuff in the past decade, starting, I would say, in about 2014, in advance of the marriage referendum, which was held that year, which basically turned inside out the constitutional definitions of marriage, parenting and family, which has destroyed any meaningful context for these concepts now in the Irish Constitution. So all of this is connected, and this is, to me, what I'm describing, and what I hope I'm describing, what I hope I'm conveying, is a country that has lost its soul, lost its direction, lost its moral compass, and lost its sense of any direction or meaning in any context publicly at all.
So what's your sense of the response to the news, whether it turns out to be accurate or not, the response to the news of this mass stabbing attack and the rioting that was documented on video? What are the possibilities, I guess, that could represent?
Well, immediately, the politicians, the Taoiseach, Prime Minister Varadkar, moved not to, bemoan or this terrible attack, or not to condemn the attacker, but to actually attack, to criticize and implicitly demonize people who had been protesting against, as a result of this, or who had been demonstrating in the streets about this violent attack, reportedly, in their capital city. And he immediately announced that they were going to expedite a law which has been on the works for some time, but was running into some difficulty. It's a hate speech law, which is by far the most radical I've ever seen in the world of these kinds of laws. And it was kind of stalled off the upper house of the Parliament here, the Senate, there a couple of months ago, thanks to the intervention of a very senior veteran politician, Senator Michael McDowell, who is, a very interesting character, very conservative in one sense, but liberal in another. A very interesting character. No comparison that I can think of in American politics, but somebody who is like an elder lemon, let's say, in the best possible sense of Irish politics. And he was saying, this is crazy. We can't have laws like this in Ireland, basically. I'm paraphrasing him. And he said, we've got to go through this line by line. And it was stalled. And now this, it seems to me, it's extraordinarily convenient. Let us put it like that. Let us say simply this. Isn't it extraordinary now that the government finally has a pretext where they can expedite this law and put it on the statute books before anything else can happen?
Well,
now,
just to interrupt for a second, I watched some remarks on that law by a Green Party senator named Pauline O'Reilly, and it's incredible. I mean, for people need to understand this too, that she was talking about basically a comfortability standard for free expression. So if I say something that makes anybody who is part of a designated marginalized community or population uncomfortable, whether it's true or not, whether it's substantive or not, if they feel uncomfortable, then I could be criminally prosecuted.
That's correct. Right? That's absolutely right. It's a very subjective thing. I mean, and it doesn't even have to be the person who feels themselves uncomfortable. It can be a bystander who thinks that another third party might have been made uncomfortable by virtue of the offence implicit in whatever was said. And that person can take an action, can take a prosecution, can pursue the offender to the point where that person can be locked up for 6 years in some instances. And moreover, the very, as it were, almost, rumor of the existence in my computer of a potentially problematic phrase, supposed hate speech, which can be anything. It can be a joke at the expense of somebody who belongs to a protected group, or has a protected characteristic, which is, to me, the definition of racism, that you have an exalted entitlement to protection by virtue of the color of your face. Now, you see, this is where we're going. But that would mean that a person can walk into a police station, make such a complaint, and that the police will then be able to go into court, get a search warrant, come down to my door. If I don't answer immediately, they can batter down my door. They can go into my house, they can tear it apart, searching for, allegedly or ostensibly searching for computers and smartphones, etc. They can rip the mattresses off, cut them with a knife. They can scatter the entrails all over the floor. They can pull every book from my shelves. They can tear up every page in my notebooks, allegedly looking for, and they can take away all my electronic devices and never give them back to me. And if I go out the next day in order to continue making a living and buy another device, they can come the next day and take that in the same way. That's where Ireland has now arrived, if this goes through in the next couple of months. Now, fortunately, there has been an outcry around the world, and this is quite extraordinary. This is an amazing thing, because for a long time I have been most disappointed by, particularly the non-response of the American-Irish diaspora to what is happening in their home country, because they don't seem to be aware. They're still living in some kind of romantic vista of Ireland as this place, the island of saints and scholars and so on. The monks who went out around the world and saved Western civilization. I'm sorry, we need some monks here really fast. If you've got any monks there, you got to send them fast, because we're.
To your point, United States Senator J.D. Vance from Ohio, Republican from Ohio, recently wrote the ambassador to Ireland taking up this specific issue of this piece of legislation, how East German it is in its content and the implications it would have on Ireland even continuing to even resemble a free society. It's remarkable. And I mean, just sort of taking a step back and thinking about all this, right? You're talking about the response of the government to this alleged attack, to the alleged rioting, the rioting that occurred afterwards, against the backdrop of this legislation that's pending. They won't give you the facts of what happened in the attack. They sort of just use the boogeyman politics of blaming right-wing extremism and blaming Elon Musk for not censoring the things they wanted censored on X and so forth. And I just wonder, when did this switch get flipped in Ireland, in your estimation? You talked about over the last 10 years or so. Was there a watershed moment that just unleashed this parade of horribles, people that are destroying democracy under the guise of saving it, like we have with the left in this country?
Yes, I think you can identify kind of two or three points which are interconnected. And I think the critical one I would go to is about 2011. That was, my view, a critical year. And that was in the context, in the aftermath of the economic collapse of 2008, which resulted in 2010 in a visitation by what was called the Troika, which is a combination of the European Union, representative of the European Union, the Commission, the IMF and the World Bank, came essentially to Ireland to accept the surrender of the Irish, economic surrender of the Irish government. In other words, our sovereignty was handed over to these guys because we were bankrupt. And that was a really devastating moment for Irish people in all kinds of ways, historically and in obviously in the economic context. But that was almost, in a certain sense, the least of the concerns. It was the idea that here again was an invading power coming to our shores to demand our surrender. Now, the following year, then there was an election, and there was a series of events that year which were quite bizarre. I won't go into them all, but there was kind of a sense, I looking back now, I have decided, I didn't spot this at the time. And I was kind of, in my book that I wrote in 2018 about a lot of this stuff, called To Give Us Back the Bad Roads, I was talking about a moment of rupture which had happened almost silently, and I couldn't identify where it was, but now I'm pretty certain that that was when it was. The election of that year, there were two elections, a parliamentary election and a presidential election, and both were kind of attended by odd events. And there were other events too. There were two state visits in the middle of the year, one by the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, and the other by the President of the United States, Barack Obama. And there were strange events around both of those kind of visits as well. They almost were back to back. I mean, I'm not sure if they didn't meet at the airport, crisscrossing in the departure lounge or whatever. But That then, you see, that we then had for the next decade a series of radical attacks on our constitution in the form of referendums, which were ostensibly to do with issues. In the first one, children's rights, which attacked a fundamental article concerning the rights of parents and families. The second one then was the marriage referendum, which was about gay marriage, which happened in 2015. And that was like, this wasn't just gay marriage. This was like overturning the meaning of marriage within the Irish Constitution to make gay two men or two women the equivalent of a man and a woman with children. And then, of course, we had the third referendum was in 2018, which essentially destroyed the protection of the unborn child, or claimed to, although I think that's a disputable point, lawfully. But I can't go into that, though, it's too complex. But my belief is that was an unlawful referendum to begin with, because you can't, no voter is entitled to vote down the fundamental right of another human being. And that's absolutely clear, and that should never be allowed. However, but then we come to the real, I suppose, the COVID episode was the real crunch moment, because what actually happened there is, to my mind, unbelievable, not just in Ireland, obviously, but worldwide. But in Ireland, I mean, I was with two people, my friend of mine and another, what they call a former journalist, but actually a great journalist, Jim O'Doherty. We took a legal action about the lockdown, trying to stop it. And we didn't succeed, but we certainly went a long way in trying to draw attention to this. But of course, we met a corrupt media, and well, let's just say we met a very uncooperative judiciary. We leave it at that. But the shocking thing here was that what I think as people all over the world will have felt, or some people, maybe a tiny minority, but nevertheless, must have felt a deep sense of shock that what was being proposed, what was actually being done, was actually even possible. That in a democratic society, in a democratic civilization, you can actually lock people up in their houses, that you can actually create concentration camps for people with head colds and make them pay for their stay in those places, that you can make people go around with pieces of synthetic cloth on their faces, on pain of being dragged out of places and thrown out onto the street, or perhaps dragged away to a police station, and so on and so on. We know what happened. But the shocking thing was the silence of liberals in that period, so-called liberals. It was like liberalism died. And in effect, what I think happened on that occasion was that there was an inversion of power, that the plug that had previously plugged the people into the center of power in our societies and in the Western hemisphere generally, that plug was overnight taken out. It was pulled and replaced by a plug which connected the power source directly to the very top of the financial tree. BlackRock, Larry Fink at the very top. Essentially what happened was that Mr. Fink was elected, or by acclaim of himself and his friends, as emperor of all the world, while we were all asleep sometime around the Ides of March 2020. And as a result, all bets were off. And therefore we had the first taste of this vicious demeanor of these political animals, really, who we thought we had elected because they were, reasonably congenial and maybe a bit stupid, but they could just do this job. They were really just messenger boys for supranational organizations anyway. But what we saw was the first taste of what we're seeing now with knobs on, with this hate speech legislation. It is a complete hatred, yes, that very word, of the people. That they have decided that the people are superfluous to their requirements and need to be shut up and stop, because they really had grown tired. All of these people, the bankers and the business people and the corporations and the politicians, they really had got very bored and tired listening to people talking about their opinions about this and that and discussing what was going to happen. We've got a world to run, lads. Come on, can we just get rid of these people, stop them chattering on, and just get on and do it, huh? Let's do it. And that was what actually essentially happened with COVID. That was the meaning of COVID. And this is simply the next phase. This is the extension of this pushing onward. And Ireland, you see, is a petri dish for the West. That's our function now. We have been an experimental, laboratory for all these. They're trying how far they can go with this thing. So, but let me therefore assure my friends in America and elsewhere that we are going to stand to the last man to fight this in Ireland, to make sure that whatever the message they take out of it, it will not be the one they're looking for. That because it seems to me that we have two choices here, very clear. Either we can acquiesce and fall silent in every conceivable way, or we can continue to do what we have been doing, continue to speak as we have been speaking, continue to speak the truth in an island of lies. And that's what I plan to do, at least.
One more variable in this discussion that we need to talk about, and it's obviously salient over the last couple of years, but longer than that, is the policy with respect to migrants in Ireland. My understanding is now there's about 1 in 6, almost 1 in 5 residents of Ireland are not natural born. And so we're obviously grappling with open border policy right now under President Biden here in America. You seem to have, Ireland seems to have pursued the same policy.
Yes, we have. Well, I think it's actually somewhat worse than that. Right? I think that, in fact, that gentleman I mentioned, the Senator Michael McDowell, wrote a letter or an article in the Irish Times last week, in which he cited from the last census results, which have just come out or just become available, and he says that census reveals that in the Dublin area, 35% of the people living in the Dublin area now are non-nationals. That has happened almost overnight. I mean, it has happened.
Is that why we saw Dublin raise the Palestinian flag?
Oh, well, it's in part that. I mean, it's in part that. But, you know, that's a lot more complex story yet, because there are many elements within Irish culture which really, you know, they pretend to be nationalistic. For example, Sinn Féin is a party which was the political wing of the Irish Republican Army. You would have thought ultra-nationalist. Now they're the most globalist party in the country. They appear to hate Ireland and everything to do with it. And they were the people mainly who were waving the Palestinian flags traditionally in Ireland. But it's more complex than that. There are other factions as well. But the thing about it is here that we in Ireland, you know, we have no... Really, we don't really have any sense of our nation anymore. This has been sort of, as it were, drained away from us in the last 20, 30 years, particularly, I suppose, as a result of the conflict, the troubles in the north, whereby, you know, this flag was sullied by the Provisional IRA. And people became ashamed, particularly people going over and back to England, where there were bombings and so on through the 70s and into the 80s. And people, I remember, they felt a sense of shame on account of that. And now, you know, there is a very strong viewpoint, let's say, that this was entirely a psychological operation, that the IRA were never a nationalist organization, that they were an appendage of MI5. That the purpose of this was to do precisely what has now occurred, which is to make people ambivalent about their Irishness, about their nationhood, about their flag, about their anthem. You know, you hear now this guy who is I hate to say it, that he is called the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister of Ireland. The Taoiseach is an Irish word which means chieftain. My God, what we have fallen to have this guy who berates the Irish people for being what he calls white. Too much white, too many white. There are no white Irish people. I just want to make this clear. We're not white. White is an ideological definition which derives from places like the United States. Yes, there's a history of where it has a meaning there, in opposition to black, and in South Africa. We in Ireland have no history of colour in that meaning. So we're not white. I'm not white. I am pasty-faced, perhaps. Sometimes I have a colour that would be definable as a farmer's tan, but I am never white. I've never ticked the box that said white in my life. Irish people only became white when they arrived in the United States as migrants themselves, and that they were thereby they were defined as white there, but not here in Ireland. Never. So because the next thing after you concede that you are white is to say that you are a racist. And we're not racist. This is no place in our culture, no place in our discussions. You know, people come here from Africa and so on, and they complain because they're surrounded by people with what they call white faces. I say, well, you know, there's a solution if you have a problem with being surrounded with people in Ireland because they have a different colour face. Go to a place where the faces are all the same colour as your own, like home. So, you know, but people won't say these kind of things to these people now because they're afraid of being racist. I think it would be racist actually not to tell the truth to people like this. This is my point, that if we are to be honest with each other and to treat each other as equals, then we need to tell each other some hard truths now. Because people are coming in here, they're being trained by non-governmental organisations, coached to call Irish people racist, to demonise Irish people, to claim reparations from the Irish people, who have been browbeaten for 1,000 years by the British and have suffered far, far more than any nation in Africa. And yet these people come in here demanding reparations from us.
Well, it's not just NGOs. As I mentioned at the outset of our conversation, I mean, I watched a video compilation of of senators in the Irish Parliament, one after the other, decrying their whiteness and confessing their sins just that are inherent with being white, and just carrying on like they were they're a bunch of Ivy League professors. And so there's that identitarian poison now that has taken hold in Irish culture, which is what you're describing.
Yes, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. It's the height of stupidity, to say the very least of it. But it is that. I mean, that's fundamentally what it is in its symptoms. Because even the modicum of intelligence would tell these people that this is nonsense. Stop. Don't. Please just stop. You're embarrassing everybody, with this nonsense. Ireland has no history of race whatsoever. We're a single people. We're Irish people. We're not white. We're Irish. If people want to come here, we don't care what colour they are. They're welcome. But behave yourself. Show some respect. This is Ireland. This is a sacred country. This is an old country. It's an ancient country. It's a rich country in culture. The fields of Ireland are soaked in the blood of our ancestors. And we are not going to lie down under any invader, no matter what they call themselves, no matter what colour their faces. We are not going to lie down underneath their boots.
So is there a rallying point in Ireland right now in opposition to what you're describing? Is it you and your cohorts in the arts and the media? Is there a politician? I mean, that's an analog to Trump in this country, which seems to be the rallying point right now politically. How does it work?
No and no and no is the answer there. And I'm sorry to say that we are a raggle-taggle of people who have really just become aware, and God knows what brings us together, what unites us. But there's no. I mean, the artists are all entirely on the other side. This is the extraordinary thing, pretty much. All the writers, poets, musicians, they are all among the woke hordes. They would be like those women, beating their breasts and decrying the color of their own faces, regretting that they weren't born black. This sort of pathetic nonsense that people come out with. So there is no party really. There are a couple of parties, but they're not really very effectual. They have no chance. I don't think the future of this is in politics anyway. This is a cultural war, but the real energy is coming from the working class of the country, from the cities and from the countryside, where these people are, what you've been finding for the last 5 or 6 years is that, small villages and communities in various cities or on the fringes of cities or in countryside villages are being invaded, orchestrated invasions. A village of 250 people suddenly have busloads amounting to 300 migrants, aliens, all male, all young men, who are now being dumped in their town, perhaps in the only large building there is in that town, in that village. And they're being just told, here's a straw, suck it up. No consultation. The government says, consultation doesn't mean that we're asking your opinion. Consultation means we're telling you what's going to happen. This is democracy in Ireland now, where the thugs that we elected are behaving as our rulers. But in reality, the ruler of all this is Emperor Larry Fink, because he it is who decides the future of the whole world. People need to understand this. This is not, it's the old thing that, Deep Throat said to Woodward and Bernstein in that underground car park, follow the money.
Well, and Larry Fink just the other week in the New York Times Dealbook Conference had this very interesting interview with Aaron Ross Sorkin, where he talked about DIE and corporate culture, and he said this is something we have to impose. We have to force feed DIE. So if he's force feeding it at BlackRock and all the tentacles that BlackRock has, and Vanguard is doing the same, and so much of corporate America is doing the same, then you can expect that their model will be adopted not just at the university level, but at the government level, which we've seen, of course. So, I mean, there's definitely a collaboration in that respect. But I wonder, in the face, because it's the same question we're wondering here, in the face of what you're describing, in terms of the political, cultural landscape in Ireland, how optimistic are you about the ability to turn the tide?
Well, that's I mean, one feels a kind of pressure in all of these situations to be optimistic, and I prefer to be realistic. I mean, Mr. Fink also said something there some time ago, which was quite alarming. In a normal world, it would be regarded as one of the most alarming things we'd ever heard, and where he said that democracy is no longer a fit for the kind of capitalism that we will have going forward. He said totalitarianism is better. Now, if we had a functional media, we don't have in Ireland. In America, there are elements of the media which are still functional, but in Ireland we have zero, except the alternative, the guerrilla media, which is raggle-taggle bunch, as I say. But very brave and very resourceful people they are, though, and they have had some successes now in getting the message out. But so if that does not cause alarm throughout the West, when the most powerful, the head of the most powerful financial organization in the world is speaking like that, and it doesn't even get reported in the mainstream media, then you've got a serious problem. And that problem, really, I would define as I said, we live in a falsified reality. We live in a pseudo-reality, like what happened in Parnell Square in Dublin. You're not sure, what parts are real and what parts are simply, projections, as though from, somebody, in the shadows, projecting a picture onto a wall. And that's the problem. That, in a world, how can you therefore have hope of overturning this when you don't even know if what you're looking at is real? And when the people speaking who occupy the sentry post of our society, these guys who used to be called journalists, and I was one for many years, have left their posts and left straw men in their places. And the people look up every night and think, okay, we can sleep tight because the sentries are at their post. But they're just straw men. There are no sentries. In fact, the sentries are actually assassins. The people claiming to be the sentries are actually assassins. And they are turning their guns upon us, the townspeople they are supposed to defend and protect. That's how serious our situation is. So you don't know where to start if you want to take on, do you start to explain to people what is reality really like? I try to do that. Or do you pick on one part of it and go after that? It's very hard to know. And I mean, the only thing I can say, is that, and it's a phrase that's going around an awful lot in the last while, is that this is a spiritual war. And I for a long time, I didn't quite understand what that meant. But I do now, because I think it has very real resonance in the context of, how powerful or not are we? What can we do? And I think it all comes down to what Václav Havel called the power of the powerless. And that means you just refuse. You refuse to do. It's like he wrote in that essay about the greengrocer who had the sign in his window, Workers of the World Unite in Prague. And he didn't realize that him having that sign there was intimidating his neighbors and causing them to acquiesce also. And that if he wanted, he should really just take the sign away. So that's what we have to do. Each one in our own little ways, doing the little we can do in every given day to stop this. And then I believe, and I do very firmly believe, that if we do it, this has been my experience, that then we invoke the greatest power there is. I don't know why that works the way that it does, but it does work that way. If we do the little we can do, however modest, however almost meaningless to us, that is enough if it is done with an open heart and the right motive, that is enough to invoke the greatest power in the universe. And that is what I am counting on in these dark days.
Yeah, I love the Havel reference. I was just thinking as you were talking too, when I'm despondent about the nature of things in America, I think about Whittaker Chambers and Witness, and how he, after he defected from the Soviet Union to America, he did so despite the fact he thought the Soviet Union was going to win the Cold War. He thought America was on the wrong side of history, but he did it anyway because of his conversion to Christianity and his belief in what was right and proper. And of course, that's the point, isn't it? To do what you know is right and proper, even if you think you're going to lose, because you may be wrong. Whittaker Chambers was wrong in a good way, right?
And also what you do may be ineffectual, or it may be the wrong thing. But if you do it with the right heart, it doesn't matter. The result will come. This is what I believe. Not alone do I believe it, I have seen it in my own life time and again. That, however useless I may be in responding to a situation, if I make the effort and do it for the right reason, then the result will be beyond my wildest dreams. That's our hope.
John Waters, Irish columnist and author. John, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate your perspectives. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please like this video and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And please leave a comment in the comment section. We'd love to hear your thoughts.